All right, welcome. So I want to talk about the extensions that GM of the Minnesota Wild, Bill Guerin, gave out last offseason. You got three guys, Marcus Foligno, Ryan Hartman, Matt Zuccarello. All three guys, $4+ million. I think Foligno, Hartman are $4 million, and Zuccarello's like $4.125 million or something. Zuccarello 2 years, Hartman 3 years, Foligno 4 years. All these guys, full no movement clauses, so you can't even send them down to the AHL to save a few bucks. If they're going to leave, they have to leave on their own terms. I don't see Foligno or really Ryan Hartman, and probably not Zuccarello, wanting out of Minnesota regardless. So let's talk about the implications this summer. All of these contracts go into effect for this upcoming season. This is just what Cap Friendly has for the depth chart. It's obviously not right. Ogren on the fourth line, probably not going to happen. Probably going to start somewhere in that middle six, ideally on that second line in place of Johansson, but we'll see. But this is kind of the issue. You're running it back with essentially the same team that you missed the playoffs with last year. You have some additions, like you'll have Ogren, you'll probably have Spurgeon for a whole season. We'll see how he recovers from, back surgery he had, and I don't think it was his first one. So we'll see on that. But for the most part, their roster's pretty much set with the exception of Chisholm and Shaw both being restricted free agents. Chisholm, you're looking at a couple million, maybe like a $2 to $3 million deal, bridge deal, $3 million on the high end. Mason Shaw, league minimum type contract. But that's it. That's all you have to sign. You have guys that are able to step into from the AHL and prospects. Most notably, Riley Heidt, probably ready for an NHL stint. You have a defenseman in Damon Hunt. You have Jack Pert, who could potentially see his way into the roster this season. You have these guys that are able to step in. So that's that. The issue, I see a glaring issue with this team, is that second line. This isn't a new thing with this team. You got that Kaprizov, Eriksson, Boldy line. It's kind of front-loading your first line, and often with Dean Evason in the past, we've seen Boldy kind of staple to that second line to provide some balanced scoring from your top six. You need scoring from both of your top two lines to be a successful team in the regular season, to make the playoffs, and to be successful in the playoffs. Right now, this second line it's not great. Rossi, kind of the highlight. I think he builds upon this past season. He was about a half point per game, around the 20 goal mark. I don't remember if he had 19 or if he hit 20. But nonetheless, Rossi should be projected somewhere around that 60-point range next year, assuming his development continues appropriately. We'll see. Sometimes sophomore slump happens and all that. But regardless, the cap space now for the Minnesota Wild, and remember, they only got to sign 2 restricted free agents, both of which have arbitration rights, I believe. So we'll see. $5.956 million in cap space, which is fine. It should be enough to sign Chisholm, Shaw, have a few million bucks left over, but that doesn't solve any issues because you're still running it back with the same team pretty much. So how did those extensions last offseason kind of force this team to stay mediocre this year? Well, here's the deal, right? Why can I not say his name? Zuccarello. First off, he started to tail off significantly in terms of point productions. He isn't very good in his own defensive zone, which is fine. You know, that's kind of what you get with Zuccarello. It's been a career-long thing. He'll try here and there, but his defensive skills aren't quite good. And that's okay because he's a good locker room guy. He's a good guy to have in general. He's a nice guy. Puts up points. But once he got off that Kaprizov line, his point production dipped hard. It wasn't good, right? So he didn't finish the season strong whatsoever. Nonetheless, that would have been a nice guy. Trade off at the trade deadline, get some assets back while his value is still pretty high, whether that's picks or whatever, or prospects. You know, you could have got something for nothing, and you'd clear up $4.125 million for this upcoming season. That would now bring this to over $10 million, just a hair over $10 million in cap space for the summer. That leaves you with a hole in your top six. Okay, well, you have $10 whatever $1 million. Great, you can do something with that. You can have some free agent signings. Not only that, the Foligno contract I don't hate. The term I'm not keen on because he's an older guy, injury prone. Great leader, great defensive forward, physical, which this team kind of needs at this point. Stark contrast to even last season, or not this past season, but the season before when they made the playoffs. Right, but Ryan Hartman, what is his role? What is his place? He's one of those versatile guys. You can play on the first line, you can play on the fourth line, you can play center, either wing, and he'll be good at his job. But what is his job? We've seen him bounce all over this roster, or all over the lines this past season. There's no clear definitive role for Ryan Hartman and what exactly he's needed for. He's a good fill-in guy. You can fill in your top six if you need him to and not look out of place. But at the same time, that could also be a guy maybe you part ways with, right? And then you're talking about two of these guys gone. That's about $14 million in cap space you all of a sudden have this summer. Remember, you have Riley Heidt. He was, third in the Canadian Hockey League? Don't quote me on that. But he was one of the top scorers in the Canadian Hockey League. He has a fine defensive game. He showed up well at training or prospect camp last year for the Minnesota Wild. I thought he had a chance to make the team. Got sent back down to juniors. That's okay. Is he 19 now? This guy looks ready for prime time. So I think you squeeze him in the lineup in some way, shape, or form. I think he's ready. I think you have to give him a hard look coming into this year. I'd be a little disappointed if we didn't see him on the NHL roster to start the year. Right? Nonetheless, that's $14 million, right, by getting rid of two guys. Well, you can go out and you can obtain a top six guy, right? You essentially have Ogren probably playing on the second line. You can, I don't know. You can make it work with your bottom six. There's plenty of bottom six guys out there, and internally you can usually fill a bottom six role. Not too bad, but the top six role is where you want to hone in. Now you're looking at unrestricted free agent Sam Reinhart. Probably gonna, I don't know. I think he signs in Florida for somewhere around that $9 to $9.75 million range. But if he doesn't sign in Florida, I can see there being a bit of a bidding war, considering he put up 57 goals last year and had 94 points on the wing. You know, he'll probably command well over $10 million on the open market. So we'll see. But I don't think that necessarily fits in with what you really with the cap constraints. Even with the $14 million, you could kind of make it work if you give Sam Reinhart $11 million league minimum. I don't know. It gets a little hairy there, right? So we're going to exclude Sam Reinhart. Stamkos, I'd be surprised if he doesn't re-sign in Tampa Bay. Nonetheless, centerman, getting older in age, but a centerman. Wild have centers. They have centers coming up. They'll be all right in the center position. I think it's the first time I've been confident in saying that since their inception. They're getting strong in that center role, which is fantastic. You need a strong core down the middle to be successful. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Jake Getzel, 30 goals last year, 47 assists, 77 points. He can play either side of the wing. Probably going to command somewhere north of $8 million, maybe like $8.5 million out on the open market. I think he's going to test the open market to see what's out there. I wouldn't be surprised if he re-signs in Carolina. But nonetheless, the Wild offer him $8.5 million. Fits into their top six for another eight or so years. It's a pretty reliable 30-goal scorer you have to pair with a playmaker like Rossi, right? The issue, and you'll have Ogren on that left wing. I keep looking there and be like, Johansson. I hope to never see Johansson in a top six role in a Minnesota Wild uniform ever again. So, fine. Getzel's going to cost a little too much? Okay. Well, let's look at Jonathan Marchessault. 42 goals last year, 27 assists, 69 points. Plays the wing as well. Could also slide right in there for a little cheaper than what Getzel's going to cost you. Marchessault probably going to get somewhere around that $7 million a year mark. But nonetheless, even if you only have $10 million, you just get rid of Zuccarello, you still have Hartman on your team, you're still around $10 million. You spend $7 million on Marchessault, you spend maybe about $2 million on Chisholm and a league minimum on Shaw, you can make that work. And then all of a sudden, you're really upgrading your top six with the loss of one player. So that's kind of what the implications of those extensions last summer have. Now, it gets even more interesting if you're looking at offer sheets. There's some interesting restricted free agents up here. I don't think any of them are going to be $10 million a year players. So you can make it work. Lucas Raymond might be one of the most probably the most expensive guy, restricted free agents at this point. You're probably looking somewhere around 8.75, right? And if you have $10 million, might be iffy, and that's assuming the Red Wings don't match the offer, and then you still got to pay some type of compensation, first round pick, whatever it is. So that's offer sheets we don't see too often because there are implications of that. But the Wild wanted to make it interesting and get one of those young guys to help grow with their young new core. That could be very intriguing. Seth Jarvis, 33 goals, 34 assists, 67 points as a right winger in Carolina this past year. Also looks to be a guy you could potentially offer sheet. So we'll see. I confuse Jarvis and Nietzsche's, who we'll talk about in a sec. Casey Middlestat, probably going to sign an extension in Colorado, but, could always offer sheet the guy. Top six young winger. Looked good in Buffalo, looked good in Colorado. Those are two very drastically different markets, both a little offensively oriented nonetheless, but Casey Middlestat, this is a team that needs a little more offense. Casey Middlestat might be a nice slot in on your second line. You also got Quentin Byfield and Marty Necas as restricted free agents as well. It's like take your pick. Do you trade for their signing rights and then extend them? Or do you offer sheet them and maybe pay a little more in draft pick compensation for these players than you would in a normal trade? It really depends what these teams are going to ask for the signing rights to these players, and kind of how you weigh that. But nonetheless, the three extensions, I think, really hamper what the Wild can do. They're at a point where even if you need cap space, even if you want to upgrade your second line, you really can't. You can't really trade any of these guys because they have no movement clauses, right? Zuccarello being traded to the Ducks, he'll probably veto that. No shame to the Ducks. I think they're trying to get their bearings straight, and they're rebuilding. They're acquiring a lot of good players, solid players. But I think Zuccarello, at his age, probably wants to win now and at least be in playoff contention to win a Stanley Cup, hopefully. Or at least I assume that's his goal, right? So that's kind of where I'm coming from. Also, if you bring in a big name like Jake Getzel, that's great because your cap space next year still increases by the same amount. For the most part, right? So next year you got the Parise Suter buyouts mostly off the books, not entirely. It decreases 13 or 14 million or 13.7 million or something like that. As it stands, a little over $35 million in cap space. You'll have to do some pretty important re-signings. Brock Faber. This might be a hot take, but I can totally see him getting north of $10 million a year for an 8-year extension. We'll find out probably in the next month when teams are able to sign those extensions. Marco Rossi will be due up for an extension as well. Konstantinov, we'll see if he gets extended this summer or if they let him play out this year and extend him from there. But that could be a little risky. I'd probably sign Konstantinov now. But that's just me armchair GMing from afar. So you have some interesting things. You're going to eat into this cap space next year just based on re-signing players to be a part of that are currently a part and or will be a part of your core in the future. So that's my take. I kind of wanted to follow up. I've been very impressed with the job that Bill Guerin has done, though I would do things differently. I don't think he's made really a bad move since becoming the general manager of the Minnesota Wild until we got to these 3 contract extensions that happened last offseason. That's it was a little questionable. And you can be like, Freddie Gaudreau. You can make the case for smaller things, but at the end of the day, Freddie Gaudreau is a guy you can send down to the AHL, get some cap relief, and then it's only eating like $1 million into your salary cap hit, right? Johansson should have a career year. He should be a little better offensively this upcoming season because it's a contract year and he needs to earn that contract to stay in the NHL. How good is he going to be? I don't know, but I don't care to see him in the top 6 or in a Minnesota Wild uniform. But he's one of those guys with a no movement clause. I think it's a full no movement clause. Let me double check. It's just a full no trade clause. So you can send him down to the AHL if you want. But you can't trade him unless he wants to go, and he probably doesn't want to go because he's getting a sweet deal in that top 6 at the moment. So it's just, yeah. So as of late, I got questions. I got questions for Bill Guerin, especially regarding these 3 contract extensions. I don't think any of them independently are bad per se. The Zuccarello extension lines up with Kaprizov. When Kaprizov hits unrestricted free agency, that's when Zuccarello's contract ends. They're buddies. I understand, part of his extension is to keep Kaprizov happy, but, I don't know. It's also professional hockey. Foligno, I get that. Leader, defensive forward, physical, but great guy in the locker room. Injury prone, I didn't really understand the term, like the 4 years, maybe like a 2-3 year deal at most. But nonetheless, fine. And Ryan Hartman on the open market probably gets $5.5 million or so. So you get him at maybe a little bit of a bargain. Very versatile player, can do a little bit of everything. Right? And you get him for 3 years. Independently, I don't think they're bad contracts. But when you take a step back, how many third-line players do you have on this team versus top 6 players? Marcus Johansson, third-line player at best. Zuccarello, given his play to end the season and given his lack of production without playing next to Kaprizov, third-line player, maybe at best. And I know that might sound harsh, but if you watched him at the end of the season, or if you watched him just without Kaprizov, it was kind of tough. Even when he was on the Kaprizov line for portions of the year, it would just be, I don't know. He wasn't impressive in my eyes. He started off the season strong, and I thought he fizzled out pretty quick. And I don't know if that's just him getting older, or I don't know if something else is going on. And that's okay. It doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, his stats were fine, and the $4.125 million contract extension is indicative of those stats. Maybe a little bit of a bargain if you're just looking at the stats. But I don't know. I felt like Kaprizov got better once Zuccarello was off of his line and Boldy was put there in place. I don't have any numbers to back that up, so I could be incorrect. If you know better, let me know. But yeah, that's kind of where I stand with this. It's not that I hate any of these specific contracts. It's that I hate that all 3 of them were given at the same time with full protection. Like full protection, no trade, no movement. I don't know. I have questions. I think you could have upgraded this team and kept 2 of these 3 players and significantly upgraded this team and make a push for the playoffs if that is your goal. And if not, I don't know that doubling down on the same team helps. Whether you're either trying to win or you're trying to not be so good. But being right in the middle, being mediocre, is one of the worst places to stay. And that's been the history of the Minnesota Wild. Very middle-of-the-road team for the most part. Right? That's not going to get you a higher draft pick, a more touted prospect to help you in the future. That's not going to help you win in the playoffs. As this roster sits, I don't. This is probably a fringe playoff team. I don't see them winning a round in the playoffs. Obviously, we'll see how this season pans out. If Ogren and Rossi are really on a roll, and then you find a guy like, I don't know, Hartman steps up to that line and just thrives with those younger guys, and you have a formidable top 6, that's good. You have Konstantinov and Foligno vibing on that third line. You get some production out of that. Maybe Mason Shaw maybe Freddie Gaudreau finds his game and plays that wing, right? And you have a solid top 9. maybe, but that's if everything goes right. And then that kind of gives you false hope like the Wild had just a few years ago when Ryan Hartman scored 30 goals and Foligno was shooting at an insane rate. What did he have? He had like 20 goals or something in that same season. A lot of guys had career years that year. So that's kind of where I stand. Let me know what you think. You know, I don't know. I don't really have words. That's the Minnesota Wild. What would you do? Would you go out and maybe sign a guy to plug into that second line? That's really where my issue is with this team. You can always figure out your bottom six, in my opinion. There's always plenty of third line centers and bottom six wingers and even fourth line centers readily available on the free agent market. Right? It's those top six guys are a lot harder to find and a lot more expensive to find as well. Their defense, I think, is fine. John Merrill, last year of his contract, probably won't play much, assuming the top six stays healthy and plays well. It's a big assumption. You know, Bogosian, big physical guy, can get hurt. Spurgeon, we'll see how he comes back from his surgery. But overall, you know, Merrill probably doesn't play much. And again, this is a team that has players that can come into this roster and play. At what rate can be questioned. I think Riley Heidt should find his way into this lineup, and maybe that rounds out your third line. Again, I don't know what you do with Ryan Hartman at that point. Great guy, but he's one of those like extra pieces that you don't really know where to put on the board. Lettieri, fourth line. Shaw, fourth line. Gaudreau, I would assume, plays fourth line this year. So you got those bottom six guys. You can put Johansson on that third line. Foligno on the third line. Kostadinov, middle six, probably third line guy. Can play wing, but a pretty good defensive centerman right there. Yeah, so that's what I got. I think I'm starting to repeat myself. So I appreciate you watching. Take care, right?